Brought to you by...
There is something about the idea of a mystery that is overwhelmingly alluring. The idea of the unknown element that draws us into its web and refuses to let go. Sometimes this pull is so powerful that we cannot rest until we find the answers, or even create those answers to satisfy the hunger within ourselves. Reminiscent of psychological greats like The Witch or Antichrist. By design, this experience is a haunting and atmospheric powerhouse that focuses its efforts on constructing its atmosphere and crumbling psyche of its characters. Adam lives a lonely existence in a cabin in a desolate forest, checking deer cam feeds on his computer and occasionally receiving visits from his brother Pete. Another family member looms large in his life, his grandmother, Nani, who has long been a receptor for a spirit she calls Sator. We are thrust into this film through beautiful black and white cinematography presented in a cropped 4:3 aspect ratio. A forest looms as an old woman sits scribbling incoherently on swatches of worn paper. In these swatches, she scribbles our opening titles with pen and ink. These first moments play out as haunting memories, imagery of possession, and an offering to an entity that looms in the forest beyond the secluded home. We are soon introduced to our protagonist, Adam, a young man living within the walls of his isolation, occupying his time with hunting, scavenging, wandering the ancient woods, and performing maintenance on a series of deer cams that he has set up around the area. He receives regular visits from his brother. The two of them treat one another with vacant stares, and barely a word exchanged at first. Adam watches him intently, as a frightened animal would keep his eyes glued on a predator in plain sight. Gabriel Nicholson's performance here is ominously chilling, conveying so much through his vacant and distant stare, without need for vocalization. His portrayal of this character speaks measures to his capability as an actor. The choice to have the narrative center so heavily around a protagonist who does not speak was a unique choice that, for me, made the experience all the more compelling. There's a madness surrounding Adam throughout this film that seems to have been planted within him long before the first frame, and seems to grow and gradually take hold over the course of the narrative. Visually, this film is presented in a cold and crushing darkness throughout a majority of its runtime. The light throughout only ever illuminates what the director intends for us to see. The film's color palette is, for the most part, a drained and muted display, with splashes of warm, artificial light that seeps in through natural or diegetic sources. The lush greenery, while maintained, is somewhat dulled down to match the dull and dirty browns of dry leaves and withering bark in some scenes, but allowed to flourish in its natural beauty in others. Many scenes plunge us into crushing shadow, and light from flashlights only illuminate what the filmmaker wants for us to draw our attention to. These extended sequences in absolute darkness create a haunting dread that looms over you as your eyes scour the emptiness of the frame, awaiting something to rear its face. At seemingly random intervals, the film shifts back into this 4:3 cropped black and white footage. However, it began to become apparent that we are cutting over to this style of footage because these segments are the utilized footage of real interviews with director Jordan Graham's grandmother, June Peterson, while the filmmaker crafted other footage to help these interviews blend into his narrative. His interviews with her were the inspirations for the film, and she talks about something called Sator as if he is real. And Sator was very real to June Peterson. He first came to her in 1968 through an experience with a Ouija, and her obsession with him led her to being committed to a psychiatric hospital. All the automatic writings you see in the film were written by June Peterson in 1968. Graham apparently wrote and shot the film entirely without help, which is an incredible feat to have achieved to this scale. Unfortunately, June Peterson passed away shortly after the film was completed. Sadly, never got to see the final product. A choice that I enjoyed was the choice that Graham makes to shoot small portions of the film, memories of Adam's past, in actual high 8 style handycam footage, which play as sort of flashbacks to years earlier, when signs of Sator's influence already began rearing their head, both in their grandmother and in Adam. Graham introduces various moments like these throughout the experience that shift us as the viewers into surreal territories. Striking dreams place Adam into a black abyssal forest, a pale glowing light into the vast distance beaconing him toward it, drawing him like a moth to the proverbial flame. Haunting beauty permeates the solemn emptiness of each frame of this film. The setting of the film drowns us in solitude and isolation, a small cabin surrounded by thick, dense forest, a vast and dark stretch of vacant lands that feel almost ancient. Something that might be more interesting than the narrative itself is the story behind the production. During pre-production, Graham built the cabin himself in his parents' backyard over the course of 2 months with mostly donated materials, while gathering all the decorations, props, costumes, and whatever else he needed. Once production began, he spent 120 days shooting over the course of a year, editing as he went along. Most of these days were just himself and 1 or 2 actors, as they waited for natural light to get just right. He would apply makeup and got his PVC dolly to roll smoothly as possible along twigs and leaves. 10 of these days, he had one person assist him doing basic tasks like holding an umbrella when it rained or driving a truck as he shot from the back. And finally, when it went into post-production, Graham did everything himself. He spent only about a week doing some visual effects in Photoshop and After Effects, but it also took him thousands of hours to learn how to grade the film himself in DaVinci Resolve. He recorded all Foley and sound effects from scratch, which took him over a year on its own. I would also like to draw attention to the entity Sator for a moment. Apparently, it's an idea that exists as a great mystery of our natural world. In the context of the film, it's a creature of nature, a powerful beast with abilities to control minds, possess bodies, and influence physical laws. The word Sator is known through the Satora Square, an ancient grouping of 5 words: Sator, Arapo, Tenet, Opera, and Rotas, that, when placed on top of one another, form the same word in any direction. These squares have appeared in ancient Italy, Greece, Sweden, Syria, and England. An old Irish folktale tells of a poet with the power to control young women, who forced the young woman to follow him into the woods until her father broke the spell. He found the Satora Square in her hand. With the events that transpired in the film, it isn't a stretch to assume that this was an influence. The easy answer is something has stalked this family for generations. The literal viewer sees the creatures, not as symbols, but corporeal beings. Demons on Earth with powerful abilities to overtake bodies, defy gravity, and break wills. Most likely, Sator is a metaphor for the debilitating toll mental illness can have on the sufferer and their family. There was no monster chasing Adam except for himself. His condition had been creeping ever closer, barely controlled for years. The final haunting shot is a surrender and a joining of the family. Unlike the taking of Deborah Logan, there is no clear-cut answer. It became clear to me throughout the journey through this film that its aim was to permeate each frame with a haunting atmosphere that would linger long after the credits have rolled. The focus is not so much on the narrative itself, but the tension and dread that it is trying to convey. This is a story that thrives in the elements of the unknowable. Graham derived the narrative from the mere mention of something called Sator, that his grandmother once spoke of to him, but never was able to explain in greater detail. The unknown question lives through the frames of this film in some ways. The way this film was crafted created a very unique blend of atmospheric horror and haunting documentary. This film is a gorgeous presentation of beautifully executed cinematography and haunting visuals, accompanied by a score and sound design that envelops you within the atmosphere that it is attempting to craft. Every crunch of the leaves or snap of a branch or animal call becomes a blend into mortifying shrieks from a Wendigo-like entity yearning to possess. Pretty impressive considering Graham created the score using pots, pans, nuts, bolts, and a bass guitar with a violin bow. The film plays out less like your standard narrative experience and more like an exploration on mental illness, passed down through generations. The plot definitely comes secondary to the atmosphere, and can be quite difficult to follow for the untrained viewer. Luckily, I've seen enough bizarre and interpretive art house flicks to be able to follow it in some form. Overall, the film is incredibly uncomfortable and impressively presented for such a low-budget film, made with such a minimal cast and crew. This film took Graham nearly 6 years to complete, due to the fact that he conducted the entirety of the post-production himself, and I have to say that for me, it was well worth the effort. Hey friends, thank you so much for watching. This one was a little different than the other deep dives that I've done in the past. I found the backstory behind this one extremely fascinating and highly inspiring, and I wanted to share it. I hope you all enjoyed taking this journey with me. If you enjoyed this video and you want to help support the channel, please consider checking us out over on Patreon. Every little bit helps this channel grow, and you can get yourself access to some fun rewards, including some new exclusive content that I have rolling out. Until next time, stay safe, keep embracing film, and thanks for watching.